The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Young Alumni Learning Series titled Leadership with Humility. We're very privileged today to have with us Scott Savage. Scott is Associate Director of Pharmacy at UNC Healthcare Shared Services Center, also an Assistant Professor of Clinical Education at the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. Scott is well known to many of us in our program. He has continued to live the Buckeye spirit through his humility and through the adversity that he has overcome in both his personal and professional career. Remember that there is ways that you can ask questions as the webinar goes on by raising your hand. If you have any other questions about the technology, you can also send us a note in the questions area. But without further ado, Dr. Scott Savage. Scott.
Thanks, Bob, for the introductions and very kind words. I'm very excited about joining everyone today and continuing this, what has been an invaluable series for myself and the first two speakers, Sarah White and John Armistead, really displayed a significant amount of humility and sharing their career trials and tribulations. And at least for someone like myself, who I feel like I'm in the early part of my career, it was nice to watch how Sarah led through her topic, and then John really showing off his successes in his career and the foundation blocks of what the program that many of us have gone to at The Ohio State University gives us all the tools to really do what the first word of my presentation is leadership. And for myself, I think without a doubt, and what you'll see from the slides that I'll share, and my transition since leaving Ohio State and almost 12 years ago now, in 2004, I was definitely the graduate that was all about leading, I think, for a lot of the wrong reasons around what's my title and how many people are reporting to me, and how can I do as much as possible with the toolkit I've gotten. And as Bob shared last week, is in answering questions with John, there are certain times in your career where you have major life transitions or changes that can completely change your perspective. And when Bob approached me with John about coming and talking about humble leadership, at first I kind of laughed, and then after taking a second and really understanding what I've gone through personally and professionally, part of the opportunity I've gotten is to hopefully pay it forward and share with many of the young alumni some of the things that I think I definitely over-contemplated and overvalued, and now where I've gotten a chance to, what I call the second part of my career, hopefully capitalize on making it a career rather than just a job based off of performance and getting more. And that really is the foundation blocks for what I'll present today around leadership with humility. The journey I want to talk about is a little bit of my own, but a lot of it is what we were taught in class today, and whether you listen to it or not, how do you actively engage and implement it. And for me, I was definitely good at regurgitation of information and getting the best grade possible under most circumstances, and just not really absorbing it and making a part of who I was naturally. Now, when it came to clinical tools and implementing what we're taught in pharmacy school, I enjoyed that and I was able to do that, but it didn't really match up with what I call my core self now, that's also in the pharmacy literature, that I think balances that outside shell that some of us are in, and who truly are you, and what does it mean to not only be a pharmacist, but to be yourself. And at the core of that, what I've learned over the past now 7.5 years, and I'll explain to you what 7.5 years means, but 7.5 years for me has kind of been the period of time that I've been in the second part of my career and really pursuing what now I know different principles in my life that are the foundation blocks of humility. And for me, it's a constant pursuit, I think, of doing it for the right reason, not doing it for self-promotion, but doing it to make others better. And I've learned that those are pieces, at least for me, of what I think is humility. And as I mentioned, objective 3 is to kind of share how failure, and many of the individuals on the last 2 calls have shared some of their own failures and reasons they've changed their perspective, but how can life changes, whether it's positive or negative failures, change how and what you do and what you pursue. And then lastly, I had the gift of coming back to the University of North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. I always thought I was going to be a North Carolina basketball player. When that didn't work out, I got sucked into pharmacy. I still remember, when I knew I wanted to be a pharmacist. Car Drugs was a local chain that now is Walgreens, part of Walgreens, and I can remember going in there as a kid and seeing the pharmacist up on the big pedestal. You watch Seinfeld, the pharmacist putting pills from the little bottle, the big bottle to the little bottle. I was like, this looks pretty cool. So I always knew that I wanted to be a pharmacist all throughout middle school, all throughout high school, and I had no reason why. But now I know part of it is I have a natural inclination to help others. And as I've gone through my transitions and I get to mentor and just interact with a lot of UNC students now, share my story, a lot of UNC residents, and the pitfalls of being servant leaders, which we all are, and what do we need to be cautious of, that I think, for me, when I look back on it, if I had embedded some of these pitfalls and set up not necessarily balance, but what I call boundaries around my professional life and my personal life, I think I could have had what I call a lower bottom than I had with my transition life-wise. And I just want to share at least what I have found are still 5 common pitfalls of servant leaders that was shared with me from a counseling center I was at in Nashville, Tennessee, and really has embedded a lasting legacy around things to avoid as I continue on my professional path. The little color blocks on the bottom is kind of the adventure I want to go on. Again, just highlighting the objectives of the framework, leaving you guys with hopefully an understanding of what core self is, and hopefully yourself reflecting, do you know what your core self is? Sharing, at least from my end, a life situation that has changed who I am, and then some of the pitfalls to be aware of as young leaders and leaders that have been in their established career, and hopefully being able to ask for help when you need help if you're seeing yourself in some of those pitfalls. So what does it look like? What does humility look like? I was going through who represents humility. I found some interesting faces. These 2 popped up immediately when I Googled humility. Donald Trump is probably not the face of humility all the time. And if you have individuals that are running around saying I'm humble, that might be a red flag. Other individuals that, as I was going through the first part of my career, I was definitely king of as many leadership books as possible, right? So I could read all these leadership books and figure out what my style is. I would read all these books and I would try to absorb other people's perspectives and try to do it the right way. And, Abe Lincoln was always one. I remember when I was at my first job in Georgia, and I was a little aggressive with implementation of infrastructure and what positions should be set up and how they should be set up. And there was this pharmacist there that had been there for about 25 years, and he brought up a book to me on Lincoln's leadership principles. He was like, he had a very thick Georgia Southern drawl, and he said, Scott, maybe you should read this and your approach could change a little bit, and it might be a little bit easier for everyone to hop on board with your vision and direction. And it made a lasting impression that, you know, you can't bulldoze people into the way you want them to act. And my perspective changed a little bit then to be more of a coach rather than an enforcer. And that was a monumental piece, but, you know, it would be amiss not to put Abe Lincoln's face up here. And then Gandhi, I think, is someone that everyone associates with the word humility. And as I've gone through my transition, you know, a lot of, and now having 3 kids, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old, which are all truly blessings that I never thought I would have. And, you know, when I think about, you know, going back to where I was when I was smaller and really doing it for the right reasons, for intrigue and interest, how do you get back to your core self? And a lot of the times you kind of lose that between being a kid and then the rigors of what we are expected to do as an adult. And so for me, these pictures kind of show a variation of what could be humility, and hopefully for yourself, reflecting on where are you? Are you in Trump land as a young leader, or are you more in the middle? And are you trying to get back to figuring out post-residency, for many of us, who you are after the rigors of education and training and what I call the grind of pharmacy education? Who are you, and what are you going to be, and how are you going to live your life? So it wouldn't be a solid presentation without some interaction. If you ever are in any of my UNC classes that I go to, I'm always that guy that if I don't get people engaged, I just call out names, the names that I know. And I think the plan is Mary's going to unmute everyone. And so if you're muted yourself and you would like to participate, hopefully this will be a chance for you to engage. And so when you think about what we talked about initially, are you humble? Where are you? Is anyone willing to throw out their definition of humility?
I'm glad to be the first
How
person,
about Patty?
but I would really love to hear Roger's comments as well. I would define humility as being selfless versus selfish, and putting yourself in front of others. I believe is a cornerstone of being humble.
Roger, do you want to give it a go?
Well, Bob, I don't know if I can add too much more to what Bob just said and some of the thoughts that you've already alluded to, but I do believe that you need to admit to yourself that you certainly don't know everything, and you continue. And the other thing is, even though after many years of both practice and education, you're still always learning, and you ought to keep yourself very open to new ideas and ways to improve yourself or your organization, whatever. So those are my just general comments at this time.
How about someone, you know, early in practice? I know I mentioned Patty Roberts or Julie Kennerly. How about one of you ladies giving a go at the definition?
You know, I have to agree with Roger here. I was thinking admitting your shortcomings and asking for help when you're wrong, and just understanding that you might not know everything. That is humility to me. That was Patty, by the way.
Thanks, Patty. Julia, I see you raised a hand.
Hi, this is Julie McGlone, and I think I've been in a practice for about 20 years. I think also part of being humble is to recognize the value that everybody else that you're working with brings to the table. Whether or not you agree with their point of view or their concept, you have to at least recognize the information that they're providing to you from their perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else before we go on? And I know that on the volunteer, you guys can raise your hands, and the last participant, Julie, did a great job of, I can see her hand and I was able to unmute her. So if you're having trouble audio-wise, just let us know, and between Mary and I, we'll try to get you unmuted. You know, it's that foundation blocks of the term is so simple, and you know, at the core of it is being human and being selfless and helping others. And what I wanted to do and challenge each of you to do over the next minute is to read through task number 2, and hopefully as we go through the slide deck, we can take a little bit deeper dive into the word, how to, what I would call, as Roger pointed out, it's a lifelong pursuit and practice. And I think for many of us, potentially where those core pieces may not be in place, what are some takeaways to work on your humility? And hopefully we'll leave with what I call a humility toolkit that I think is different for everyone, depending on where you are personally and professionally. But if you consider each one of these 5 questions, if you're sitting at your desk and you could take a break to read them, and then not too many times you'll have a conversation on humility, but just simple dichotomous yes/no questions. You know, 1, is it a focus on oneself? 2, has there been a major event, positive or negative, that reflects your definition of humility? 3, kind of a tricky one, can you have an ego and be humble? And 4, is there room for this behavior in today's corporate environment? And 5, you know, one of the things I've been constantly reminded by many people is, you know, everything that's going on in your head probably isn't right. And how do you actually use what I found, the heart? Do you feel like you have it in you? And do you practice each day? So as you answer those, hopefully, you know, getting honest with yourself, it will be a good cornerstone to the rest of the deck and for some things to consider as we have takeaways. And so I'll leave you with this question throughout the deck. Can humility be developed and practiced for success? So this is kind of where I was post graduation from the Ohio State University. As many of you probably go through about this time in your second year of residency, you're thinking, where am I going to work? Where am I going to live? If you're in a serious relationship or you're not in a relationship, you're thinking, are you going to get married, or are you going to always be by yourself, right? And it's that fork in the road. And honestly, I've come to this many times on a daily basis. And for me, my natural inclination is to probably try to take the easy way out and avoid things and avoid conflict. And I've changed my approach to this simple picture many times, and it's a practice, and it's kind of an adventure, a voyage of trying to do the right thing. But when you're in that spot of choosing between good and bad, hopefully some of the principles that you'll learn around your compass of humility will be things that you go back to, which for many of us are innately built in: honesty, integrity, hope, faith, you know, those pieces that aren't necessarily taught in school, and most time are either learned behaviors, mentor behaviors from parents. But if you do not have that toolkit, what do you rely on? And so the life piece for me, this picture resonates in my head a lot of trying to figure out where I'm going with what I've got and preparing for hopefully the best outcome possible. The next few slides kind of, to me, give a framework of what I've shared when I've had the opportunity to give this presentation. of what are we taught. And for me, whether it was right or wrong, going through school, the pharmacist code of ethics weren't as valuable as they should have been to me, because it was all about, what's the latest pharmacy literature, what is the next exam, what are the things that I'm going to take away to make me a better pharmacist. And I definitely confuse those with more of the technical skills versus where I've learned a significant amount now of the soft skills that I think are required to do and sustain the profession that many of us are in. But the code of ethics talks about that knowledge and skills. It talks about that continual learning that Roger talked about, the service orientation that Julie talked about, the pride in the profession, the relationship with the patient, and having that trustworthy, accountable for your work, and doing it in an ethical, sound, decision-making fashion. And I really have, that word ethically, doing something with integrity, I really understand what that means now and the importance of that. And then one that I always thought was very easy is just leading, right? Where it's leadership. All these things, it's just about leadership. All this other stuff is soft skills that I don't really need to focus on. But I put this in here because we are taught this, and it wouldn't be a solid pharmacy presentation without a little bit of pharmacy literature. Same thing as in pharmacotherapy. If you're a nuts and bolts mind and you like infrastructure, I love this traits picture of a tire, the hub of the tire, the spokes of the wheel, where the rubber meets the road. All those things that we as pharmacists naturally, I think, take pride in, good pride, not egotistical pride, but the patient relationship, the behaviors and actions of how we do it, and then the results of where the rubber meets the road, and trying to exercise that impactful C word, character. How do you treat others? How do you act on a daily basis? And how do you behave? And for me, a lot of that, I think, comes into play with different preceptors that are put in your life, and how do you focus on that? All of it kind of comes down to this foundation block of core. And I mentioned honesty, integrity, and service, the behaviors of being empathetic, compassionate, and accountable. And for me, going through school and going through the first part of my career, I can honestly say this wasn't something that I routinely thought about, if at all. And it was, and I know that probably sounds very sick, but I think just to be very candid about where I was, still I was so intertwined with what's my performance and how am I delivering, that these things that truly make what I know now is life, a life that is worth living, are innate pieces of my being that I'm very thankful for. And I spend a significant time on practicing these behaviors of empathy, compassion, accountability. I do not do it well every second of the day, but I know what they mean. I know how impactful they are. And these core pieces or core principles of honesty, integrity, and service, I think, strike at the core for me of what brings joy to my career now, and how I interact with my staff on a daily basis. This picture, as I mentioned, I feel like I've got the first part of my career and the second part of my career. When I was in Georgia, at the Medical College of Georgia, now it's Georgia Reagents, I was a new graduate, about a year out, and at that time, I know most of you all know Joe DiPiero, and Joe was full-time professor for the University of Georgia for many years. He was on site in Augusta, Georgia, where my primary job was. And Dr. DiPiero took another job at the medical MUSC to be their executive dean. And you're in these spots occasionally to pick up lectures that no one else or that prior faculty are doing. And Joe had been doing one for the UGA College of Pharmacy on mentoring for like 10 years. And I got approached by Joe to say, hey, would you mind doing this mentoring talk? And I'm thinking, the learners are going from Joe to Piero, the book that I still see pharmacy students get him to sign, to me to talk about mentoring. And he had this slide that always resonated with me. And now I know why it resonated with me, because I really embodied, I feel like, a lot of that cookie-coated shell or this professional outer image. But this personal center was red. It was something I could never really understand, the personal center. Like, what am I? And I would get up and do these talks about the importance of the personal center and discussing really what I always was intertwined with was performance. And there was just this disagreement of what I know for me, and many times I go in and do leadership talks, there's always the Harvard Business Review articles on level 5 leadership. And depending on which version you look at, you'll notice the one on the right when it talks about level 5, executive leadership, building enduring greatness, with the combination of personal humility plus professional will. And for the longest time, I think I equated rising to the professional expertise as level 5 leadership, but it was getting done in the wrong way. And so for a lot of the graduates, at least, or a lot of the leadership residents that we have, when they get into the second year, they all look burned out. And it's one of those things where they've been working so diligently. How do you take a step back and celebrate those successes, but also understand that you can't lose who you are? And for me, I think it's an important piece of this leadership with humility, that my thought process of it's about, the things you're doing, the successes you're having, but it got lost in the fact that my core self was rotten. And there was no way the first part of my career that now I look back, I was ever going to achieve, as Bob pointed out, what we're ingrained with coming from Ohio State. What is that Buckeye spirit? I've kind of figured it out. I also call it the Carolina spirit, Carolina way. It's doing it the right way with humility. And for someone that wanted immediate gratification in a fast manner to be the VP of pharmacy or the system director, get to that level 5 leadership, it was never going to happen because of the way I was living and the way that I was doing things. And those are the pieces that the prior slides of this framework tell us how to do that, but most of us probably may not value it as much as, what is that pharmacotherapy result that I need to memorize and regurgitate to be the best clinician? Or what is that HBR or the leadership book I need to read and implement with my team so I can get the most out of them result-wise? And it may be simple as just focusing on soft skills. How do you talk to people? How do you speak to people? How do you listen to people? And how do you make them better when it comes down to it? And so a lot of what I found personally over my first part of my career is that the concepts learned can be applied, but your own house has to be in order. And a lot of the focuses of what I found and now value around the spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, this is that core self. And these are the 4 pieces of it. And I never focused on any of them the first 10 years of my career. I had physically started to fall apart mentally. My wife would definitely tell you I was exhausting. Emotionally, I probably wasn't there. And spiritually, I was void. And so when you look at those things, and if you're grading yourself now, I was 0 for 4. And that was 10 years out of the Ohio State program. And I didn't tell anyone, right? Because I still was successful professionally. I still was getting new jobs. I still was getting presentation opportunities, but I was miserable. And I share that now because I know I'm not miserable, which is a good spot to be in. But I've come to appreciate these principles of gratitude, humility, honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, all things that I think roll back to this term that we're trying to define of humility. So this slide for me, it kind of brings up a lot of different emotions. That is my face, right? And it is Googleable. It will never go away. And so part of my bottom was getting to the point of where the career that had given me so many things, I was diverting drugs. And so my use of substances dates back to my teenage years. And that pattern of thinking that that was how life was supposed to be lived started getting complicated when you have access to money. You do not have the focus of school. You are trying to figure out who you are. And my outlet was alcohol and drugs. And the movement of my life the first 10 years out of Ohio State was plagued by what is now for me the disease of addiction. And so I know now that the disease that I have wants me dead. It likes me to isolate. It doesn't want me to get up and talk to people. It doesn't want me to get up and lead a staff of now 75 FTEs. But when I had this picture taken the morning of February 8th, I was in a tough spot. And thankfully, the program that the North Carolina Pharmacy Recovery Network is, NCPRN, has given me another chance at a career. And whether you know it or not, a lot of the individuals that are very intertwined with the Ohio State University program and the School of Pharmacy were instrumental to taking me from 2008 to what is now 2015. And so this life piece for me, and what I always kind of tell students, you know, this change in the road, as I was presenting earlier, doesn't have to be jail, right? That's my hope for this message, is not necessarily that it changes anything that may be used singularly, but if anything, where I was and the value of a lot of the people on this call today and the program is there's a lot of people that are better than I am that live humbly every day, and there are a lot of hands that were reached out to me when I did not have the ability to ask for help, but it took this for me to ask for help. And I share it now because A, it was very public. If you were regionally located in the Raleigh-Durham Chapel area, it lives with me. As my 9-year-old knows, it is Googleable. And it's one of those pieces that I have to wear publicly because I'm here and I'm alive. And my career is really back to where it was before this picture. And so to me, that leadership with humility, this guy had the tools, honestly, of leadership. This guy that you see on this slide had no idea what humility is. And now for me, I think the train is a major spot at the age of 30 of figuring out at that point whether I was ever going to be a pharmacist again or not. And honestly, at that point, I had no idea if I was ever going to be able to come back to the profession, which I now know I really like. It's even cooler than it was then, and it's a joy to be here to share this mugshot and this story. So where I am now, and I think part of the reason that Bob reached out and other leaders at Ohio State to kind of tell my story to the new graduates is, you know, my story of addiction doesn't have to be your story, and nor do I ever want it to be. And there can be simple things in your life that could be as easy as just talking about it with someone that could totally change your approach, and you'll see the foundation block I have on the slide, your passion for life. As I've gone through this kind of series of major terms, honesty, willingness, faith, humility, and this sign that I put up here, my failure has led to a life that I never thought I would have, right? You know, that one child I had from the guy that had the mugshot is now 9. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. My wife actually stayed with me and allowed me to have a marriage, which I was vacant from. And these are principles that, as the toolkit we all have as leaders, when you combine them with these principles, it just makes the profession even more enjoyable. And it really brings that passion that I like to come in to the job that I'm doing right now. And I don't have a problem necessarily bringing my A game every day. And it's all with the seeds of what the individuals on the call were defining earlier of humility. And how do you practice that every day? And for me, it literally is an everyday practice that, as some of the staff that I have reporting to me are on the call, I don't do it perfectly every day. But at a minimum, we talk about this stuff routinely here, and it's something to share and hopefully pay forward with the presentation I'm giving today. So when I mentioned development is possible, this was a recent HBR posting, and it kind of went back to that level 5 leadership. And I think for all of us as leaders, wherever we are in our career, it can be a focus that can be practiced. And I think someone nicely stated it. The number one that ironically comes from probably a Twitter feed that most of us get from HBR, at least I do, and you get all these cool things that, at least for me, I want to implement that day out of HBR when I get up and I'm looking through social media, and it says, know what you do not know. And that was difficult for me. And coming to the point where I am now, I can say that, and I don't take that as devaluing myself. So knowing what you do not know as a young leader, I think is, if you've got that, you're ahead of the game. Resist falling for your own. And for me, that means, you know, do not be self-led and selfish to the point of where you think you are everything and you're bigger than the program, or you're bigger than what we're here to do as a profession. And how do you resist that and make the most of it to change lives and to impact a profession that has been bestowed upon us by our education and our training, and is truly a gift. And I know what that gift is like to be taken away, and it's hard to explain that to a lot of individuals, but when you sit in the board of pharmacy and they're telling you your license is suspended, the likelihood of you getting it back is very low, and you've been in 9 years of school. It's a little bit a lonely feeling, and I don't want that again. Number 3, never underestimate the competition. I laugh at this because, you know, it may just be me, and I share this because I want to be very candid, and that's the intent, I think, of me participating in the sessions, is I didn't think anybody could beat me, right? And maybe it's the the athletic environment I grew up in, the ego, the narcissism, but never underestimating the competition. And for me, this has been a huge gift of being in recovery, is, you know, people that I probably wouldn't have let in, or, you know, taken the time to appreciate and understand, ironically have made me better. And, you know, never underestimating the competition, because what I've truly learned is it's a partnership, it's about collaboration, and those pieces of partnership and collaboration have have been a tremendous asset to me coming back into the profession and knowing that I do not know everything, and knowing that I may not want to take that call or have that meeting, or why am I meeting with that person, but extending that has given me some significant gifts and some divine intervention on things that Scott doesn't know everything, and there's other plans for him that he's just not aware of. Number 4, embrace and promote service. There's a lot of thought leaders up here in a myriad of spots in their career, and for me, it's humbling when I went back to the Ohio State University in the spring. I hadn't been back since being in recovery. I used to go back every year to football games. And I loved going back up there. I loved Columbus, and being in recovery, there are things that I never did in Columbus, right? I love running now, and I was running through campus and seeing all the things that, then Jerry Siegel would say, you've got to go see this before you leave Columbus, Ohio. And I was like, I don't want to see that. I'm going down to High Street. I got happy hour to go to. And so ultimately, those pieces of things I just never see, the service that we provide, the opportunity we've got, just think about it if you're ever back in Columbus. It's a wonderful place. Number 5, listen to the weird ideas. Challenging yourself to get others around you that do not see things the way that you see things, and being advocates for them that everyone's not going to be just like you. And then be passionately curious. And so these 6 steps, they're right in one of the major leadership things that many of us quote, and it's just a op-ed about humility that isn't published very often. But if you look at the prior slides, that difference between if you're on that scale of trying to pursue this level 5 leadership, these are kind of some of the steps that we can practice each day to continue expanding on this term humility. One of the last slides, and I know this is a lot more me talking, and hopefully it's engaging, but the common pitfalls of servant leaders. And so, it would be amiss not to share where this came from. Sage Hill Counseling is the rehab place that I went to for quite an extended time, a little over 3 months in Nashville, Tennessee in 2008. The executive director of this rehab program's a PhD in counseling, but his father is a surgeon, and his father was a surgeon in Tennessee and was an alcoholic, and went into recovery in the late 70s and set up the Tennessee Physician Program for professionals needing help. And so this individual that was overseeing this counseling location had this father who was a servant leader, a surgeon, who was never around growing up and got into recovery. This individual went into counseling to help other people with addiction, also ended up being an alcoholic and a drug addict, and is now in recovery. And he came back to Nashville, Tennessee about 20 years ago, and he opened up this place called the Center for Professional Excellence that focuses on healthcare professionals that have substance abuse issues or other addictive diseases, which addiction is a lot more than alcohol, drugs. It can be sex, it can be eating, it can be gambling. It kind of preys on everything. It can be religion. And we had this group of men in this place, and he would always talk about these pitfalls of servant leaders. And when I think about the interactions that I have with learners on a routine basis, I see these things every month, right? I still see it, that and I'm guilty of this, that the work that we do is that what we're worth. And do we forget and do we not teach the fact of how to be as a learner to be human? We so much are judged by our performance rather than being present, and we become humans doing, and it's all about the performance. He would argue that isolation, we always say, man, I can't wait to get off and get away. And the way he presents it is getting away is isolation from your troubles that are inescapable. And then secrets and people becoming things. How are you treating others around you, and what are you doing with it to make others better? The gentleman I was talking about as executive director, his statement is that everyone is either in active addiction or they're in active recovery. And he's convinced that people that are using things to get away from themselves, you have to have that life situation or change to be able to see what's important. And he would always say, how do you practice humility? And so when John and Bob approached me about this humility talk, I was thinking about my rehab place, and as I was sharing with some learners earlier this morning, I remember arriving in Nashville, Tennessee on February 13th, 2008, and him coming up to me saying a lot of different things. But one of the things he said, do you know what humility means? And after, what would have been 2 decades of education in that state, I said, no, I don't know what humility is. And he said, well, go, when you go home tonight, I want you to look up humility. And then you're going to come back and stand up in front of this group and tell us what the definition of humility is. And so now I know. I know what it means in the definition which we learn in Webster's, but also I've been given the gift that a lot of the people on this call, whether you know it or not, have allowed me to practice the principles of humility, to get better at humility, and then ultimately lead to what I think we're all after, which is a life that's been made better by the profession that we've been gifted with. And so these common pitfalls, as you think back to the first exercise we went through with defining it with the yes/no questions and then considering where you are today, hopefully give you some good checks and balances to consider as you move forward. The last slide that I have, did you grow? Do you know yourself? And so it's just a humility activity sheet. And so hopefully, if you remember anything from this conversation, other than the ugly mugshot, that you will have a definition of humility. How do you encourage humility on a day-to-day basis with whoever you report to? Inviting feedback, encouraging dissent. How do you turn failures into opportunities? And then lastly, I think some of the shares that we initially had, how do you show humility and how can I show humility? So just things to consider. I had John Armisted's, one of his slides up here from the presentation last week, and him just leaving his last slide just spoke volumes to me about being happy with who you are. And I think that speaking, coming from where he is professionally, and then Sarah White's presentation, just are 2 professionals, at least for me, who have done it the right way and have had significant careers in the profession that I hope to follow their paths. And this core word, humility, was definitely at the core of that. As I see, I misspelled it. To point that out to everyone. So I'm still not perfect, but at a minimum, the humility activity sheet will be something that hopefully you can use. So with that, those are the slides that I have to cover the topic. I had the activities on the front end to hopefully get you fired up about what it is and what it can be. And I don't know, I just wanted to open it up if there are any general questions about it or anything else. That's where I am.
Hey Scott, this is John Herdig. I just wanted to take a moment and thank you again. We knew you'd be the perfect person for this, and getting to listen to the story and how that's integrated into your own approach is just really impactful. One of the things that I've heard from young alums that constantly comes up, especially as our new leaders enter their first jobs, is how do you be humble but also still garner respect and credibility? How do you kind of balance those two sometimes opposing factors? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on how our younger alums can do that?
I think that's a great question, and at least my experience has been, for so many of us, I think we expect our expectations are unrealistic, and part of that, at least sharing with my peers who I've graduated with, it's all about the next position. What promotions are you getting, or what scope increase are you getting? And what I found again is, if your own house is in order, those things will come. And all the worrying that, at least for myself, you do about getting the right role or moving into the right position, it's just such wasted mental and physical energy. And I know that's hard for people to understand, but if I could encourage anything, it's really having someone around you that can rebase your own expectations and be, as the second one talks about, encouraging dissent and inviting feedback. Some of us will not be CPOs, and some of us may just be managers or supervisors, and that's okay. And I think for a lot of my leadership team that I have here, and having these conversations, for some of us, the first time they've heard that it's okay to be a supervisor of a 20-bed community hospital, because it's equally as impactful. And so I think the biggest thing is, what are your expectations? Having someone around you that you can talk to about all this mental energy that you're spending worrying about something that 2 years from now will be very minimal. I see, Rachel, I know your hand was up, but I don't know when it was up. So are you still there for the question?
Sure. Sorry, we have two computers in the room. I'm a second-year admin resident here at Ohio State, and I had a question as for new leaders, as we're mentoring people and we see someone that might need to work on, say, some humility skills, how do we mentor that individual to be more humble? Is that something that's possible? Is it leading by example? Is it providing them this humility activity sheet? I guess, what's the best way to go and advise that individual?
Well, I'll answer it, and I know there are some people with more experience than I have that are welcome to chime in. For me, it's making it a part of. How about I'll mute you again, and you can still hear me. It's one of those things where you have to make it a part of the dialogue, and equal to all the skill sets we teach about leadership. What is the way to put it on the radar? And I think for me, you just have to be prepared with the fact that they might not be ready to receive what you're trying to tell them, and that's okay. And for me, it's you making that a part of what you want to pay forward to learners, and it may work 1 out of 20. And what I found is, by having this conversation, it's come full circle at times, and I'll have learners that call me 5 years out and have a question about recovery or something they're going through, and advice on how do you handle things. Does that make sense, Rachel? Okay. Hey, John, I see you have a question. maybe not. That's all right. Was there any other questions or comments?
Scott, this is Bob Weber. I just wanted to make a comment, and then wanted to close out if it's okay. If it's okay with you, I guess the comment on feedback, which I found, and I'd actually like your opinion on this. When I have given people feedback in the past, sometimes I've given feedback that's been honest, and I've gotten a lot of negative pushback. You know, a lot of defensive nature, a lot of defensive talk, and just folks. Actually, I've had some relationships with people that have been destroyed by me giving them honest feedback. But what I found out is oftentimes it's about them. It's not about me in terms of the feedback. And I guess I would want your opinion quickly about that sort of scenario. What do you do if you give somebody honest feedback and it maybe destroys a relationship or, you know, significantly hampers a relationship you may have with someone?
You know, my experience has been, you know, you never know, and you can't control their reaction. And I think for me, Bob, I've always tried to have those conversations after, you know, which I know you do this well, you know, sincerely evaluating the content, how I'm delivering it. You know, I have, you know, some trusted individuals that when I'm having these types of conversations, I'm trying to see if it's a me thing or is it them, and making sure, like, that heart question, that it's for the right reasons. And I think, as you said it nicely, for the people pleaser in me, nothing ruins my day more than not making somebody happy. And when you deliver information that is constructively done, objective, and to the point, I think we have to be prepared that we may not be liked, which is not easy. And I have similar times delivered that type of information, and I think when I look back on it, there's been times where maybe my intentions weren't right. But now where I am, a lot of the times before I deliver that, I've validated it plenty of times to know that it's for the right reasons, and hopefully, again, that word codependent, right? I don't want to be codependent on their response if I'm doing it in a constructive, objective manner, and that's been my compass in those conversations.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's really, really great advice. So it brings us to the end of our third Young Alumni Learning series on humility. I wanted to again take this opportunity to thank Scott. Scott, you're again a true Buckeye. You've been through a lot, but you've really achieved a lot. So we all are very proud of you and what you've done over the past several years. I would like suggestions for future series topics. Please send them to me or to Mary Vincent if you have an idea, or if you'd like to participate in presenting one of our webinars, please let us know. I also wanted to remind folks about the mid-year clinical meeting. We have the Lashley Luncheon, which is Wednesday, December the 9th from 11:30 to 1. You're all welcome to come, and hopefully we will see you in New Orleans at the mid-year clinical meeting. Again, I appreciate everybody participating in the webinar series. Have a safe trip home tonight, and go Buckeyes.